It began on one of the coldest nights I can remember. The kind of night where the frost clings to the windows, and the silence is broken only by the groan of old wood and the wind slipping through the trees. I was staying in my grandmother's cottage then, a lonely house pressed close by the forest, with snow so deep that the road to the village disappeared after dusk. I woke just after midnight. I don't know why. Perhaps the stillness was too sharp, or maybe something inside me already knew. That's when I heard it. Not on the front door. Not on the walls. On the window beside my bed. I sat up, listening hard, trying to steady my breath. My first thought was that it might be a branch blown loose in the wind. But there were no trees close enough to touch that glass. The nearest oak stood 10 paces away, and its bare limbs couldn't reach me, no matter how the storm pushed. I told myself it was nothing. I lay back down, pulled the quilt up to my chin, and shut my eyes as tightly as I could. Sleep came in fits, shallow and uneasy. In the morning I checked. Snow lay smooth and unbroken beneath the window. No branches. No footprints. Nothing. I wanted to put it out of mind, but the next night it came again. Just as the clock struck 12, the sound returned. I froze in bed, every sense straining. The sound was deliberate. Low. Waiting. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare breathe. The room felt colder than it had any right to be, as though the frost outside had crept in through the glass. Then the window fogged. Not from me. From the other side. A bloom of mist spread across the pane, the shape of breath against the cold. And within that mist, the faint impression of a face began to take form. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even look for long. I pulled the covers over my head and stayed there until morning light bled through the curtains. When I finally looked again, the glass was clear. The snow beneath it remained untouched. That morning I told my grandmother. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped tight around a cup of tea she never drank. When I finished, she set the cup down carefully, her eyes fixed on the table. Then she said only this. Do not answer it. Do not speak to it. Do not look at it again. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled against the wood. That was how I knew. She believed me. The third night was worse. The knocks came again at midnight, steady and patient. My fear battled with something else. Curiosity. Had to know. I couldn't stay buried under the quilt another night, wondering. So I lit a candle and crept to the window. The flame shook in my hand. There it was. A handprint on the glass. Pale, long-fingered, pressed flat against the frost. The outline was sharp, too sharp for any mistake. I stumbled back, the candle sputtering. The knocks grew louder, sharper, rattling the frame until I thought the glass would shatter. My chest pounded so hard it hurt. I ran down the hall and burst into my grandmother's room. She rose at once, lantern in hand. Together we went back, but by the time we returned, the handprint was gone. The window stood silent and clear, as though nothing had ever touched it. She closed the curtains tight and sat by my bed the rest of the night, the lantern flame glowing weakly between us. She didn't speak. Not a single word. But I saw the way she watched that window, never looking away for long. And just before dawn, when her face softened for a moment in the half-light, I realized something that chilled me deeper than the knocks themselves. She had heard it too. That was the first time. And it was only the beginning. The nights that followed dragged on longer than I had ever known. Every evening, as the shadows crept across the cottage floor and the forest sank into silence, I felt it building. The dread. The waiting. Midnight was no longer just a number on the clock. It was a promise. My grandmother carried herself as though nothing had changed. She lit the lamps, stirred the stew, and said her prayers aloud by the fire. But I saw her glances. The way her eyes flicked toward the window when the wind shifted. The way she drew the curtains earlier each night. She was listening just as I was. For 2 nights the knocking did not return. I dared to hope it was over. But on the 3rd night something new came. It wasn't the sound of knuckles on glass this time. It was softer, almost like a voice. I had just drifted into sleep when I heard it. A murmur, faint as a breath, threading through the silence. I thought at first it was a dream, but the longer I lay there, the clearer it became. Words. The window. I couldn't make them out, not entirely. They slithered through the crack between glass and curtain, hushed and urgent, like someone speaking from a great distance. I pressed the quilt over my ears, but it slipped through anyway. Let me in. I held my breath. My skin prickled. Cold, so cold. Every instinct told me not to move, not to listen, not to answer. My grandmother's warning echoed in my mind. Do not speak to it. I shut my eyes and tried to pray. My lips wouldn't form the words. The whisper came again, sharper this time. Numi. I bolted upright, heart pounding. The candle by my bed had gone out though I hadn't touched it. My breath smoked in the air like it was winter inside the room. The whisper grew louder, insistent now, circling the windowpane like a hand dragging along the glass. I could almost see the frost shifting, as though stirred by something just beyond the curtain. I couldn't bear it any longer. I ran for my grandmother's room. She was already awake, sitting upright in bed, as though she had been waiting. Her lantern was lit. She didn't ask what was wrong. She only said, "You heard it." I nodded. Her face tightened. "It's growing bolder." She pulled me into her room, shut the door, and pushed a chair beneath the handle. We sat in silence, listening. The whispers drifted through the house, faint and searching, until at last they faded into nothing. By morning the world seemed ordinary again. The snow glittered in the light, the fire snapped in the hearth, and the smell of porridge filled the kitchen. But the air between us was heavy. Finally, I asked her what I had been too afraid to before. "What is it?" She didn't answer right away. She stirred the pot, slow and steady, as though the question itself was dangerous. Then she said, "Something that was never alive but wants to be. That's all you need to know." I tried to press her for more, but she silenced me with a look. The kind of look that ends a conversation before it begins. That night, I lay awake long before midnight. Sleep wouldn't come no matter how I tried. I counted the creaks of the house, the groans of the rafters, the hiss of wind against the shutters. When it came, I heard it before the clock struck 12. The whisper slid through the dark, closer this time. Clearer. "Please, let me in." I pulled the quilt over my head, clutching it with both fists. My body shook so hard the mattress rustled. The whisper sharpened. "I see you." The curtains stirred though the window was shut tight. A shadow stretched across the floor, long and thin, reaching toward my bed. I couldn't breathe. My throat locked. I wanted to scream but no sound came out. Then, just as the shadow brushed the edge of the quilt, the door burst open. My grandmother stood there, lantern blazing. The shadow snapped back, retreating like smoke into the corners of the room. The whisper cut off mid-word. She crossed the room in 2 steps, yanked the curtains closed, and set the lantern by the window. "Stay away from the glass," she said, her voice low and fierce. I didn't sleep at all that night. She stayed with me until dawn again, silent, watchful. When the first gray light spilled across the snow, she finally spoke. "It knows we're listening. It won't stop now." She didn't explain what she meant, and I didn't ask. But deep down I understood. Whatever it wasn't knocking anymore. It was trying to speak. Sleep became a stranger after that. I would lie down each night, but my eyes refused to close, and when they did, the whispers followed me into dreams. My body was weary, but my mind never stilled. Kept waiting for it. Sound. Voice. The breath against the glass. My grandmother tried to keep the routine steady. Porridge in the morning, soup in the evening, prayers at the fire. She spoke little of what was happening. Her silence told me enough. Speaking of it gave it power. I tried to follow her lead, but dread swelled inside me like a tide that couldn't be held back. The third night after the whispers began, something changed. It was just after midnight. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling when I heard it. Not the knock. Not the whisper. Creak. The long groan of wood straining under weight. From the hall. Froze. The sound came again, slower this time. A deliberate step on the old floorboards. My room door was cracked just enough for me to see a sliver of the hallway. A faint glow stretched across the wood floor from the lamp my grandmother always left burning. And in that glow I saw it. Shadow. It stretched long and crooked along the wall, far taller than a person, with arms that dragged like they had too many joints. It moved slowly, one dragging step at a time, the sound of its weight heavy on the boards. I couldn't move. My body felt pinned to the mattress. The shadow paused at my door, filling the crack with its shape. The light bent strangely around it, as though the lamp itself struggled against the presence. I held my breath. My chest ached with the effort. Then the shadow shifted. A hand-shaped blur pressed against the wood, fingers long and spindly, searching along the frame. The doorknob rattled once, twice. I nearly cried out. And then it stopped. The shadow withdrew, slow and deliberate, gliding back down the hall until the glow returned to normal. The boards creaked one last time, and silence fell again. I waited what felt like hours before daring to breathe. My throat was raw, my body damp with sweat, though the room was cold enough for frost to touch the corners of the glass. At dawn, I found my grandmother already in the kitchen. She looked at me once and knew. She didn't ask, but her eyes hardened. "It's inside now," she said quietly. Her words struck me colder than any draft. "You mean?" She nodded. "It's crossed the threshold." I didn't ask how she knew. The answer was plain enough. That evening, she went to the old trunk at the foot of her bed. I had never seen it open before. The brass lock was tarnished, the wood scarred. She pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth and set it on the table. Inside were objects I didn't recognize. A jar of salt, small cracked mirror, a length of black thread tied in knots. She placed them around the room with practiced hands, as though she'd done it before. "These are to slow it," she said. "Not to stop it." Her tone carried no comfort, only resolve. I asked her again what it was. She didn't answer directly. She only said, "There are things that wait in the dark for the right door to open. Once they step through, they don't leave on their own." That night, I didn't sleep in my own bed. She made me lie on the cot in her room, the lantern burning bright between us. The walls groaned, the windows rattled, but no whispers came. I almost believed we were safe, until the sound returned. The boards creaked in the hall. Slow, dragging steps circling outside her door. The lantern flame flickered, as though pulled by a breath we couldn't hear. The knob turned once. Her face was set, her eyes fixed on the door. She whispered words I didn't understand, steady, unshaken. The knob stopped turning. The steps retreated. Silence fell again. But I knew, and she knew, that silence was not safety. In the morning, the salt she'd poured across the threshold of the door was scattered, the line broken as though something had passed through. The thing was not content to linger outside the glass anymore. It was in the hall. And soon it would be closer. The morning after the shadow walked our hall, my grandmother did not light the fire right away. She stood at the window instead, staring at the trees as if waiting for something to appear between them. Her face was pale, lips pressed tight, eyes fixed on the line where the forest met the snow. When she finally turned to me, there was no softness in her voice. "It won't stop now. We have to go deeper." I knew what she meant before she even said it. Trunk. That heavy old chest had sat at the foot of her bed for as long as I could remember. Dust gathered around its legs, and its brass lock was dulled by years of disuse. She had never opened it in front of me, never even allowed me to touch it. And when I once asked what was inside, she told me only this: things better left closed. But that morning, she took the key from around her neck and knelt beside the trunk. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed too loud for the quiet house. She lifted the lid, and the air that escaped was cold, like a breath held too long. Inside lay objects that felt both ordinary and strange at once. A jar of salt, a bundle of dried herbs, candles stubbed low and melted into twisted shapes. A mirror no bigger than a hand, its glass cracked across the middle. A bundle of black thread knotted into shapes I couldn't name. She handled each one carefully as though it might bite. "These are protections," she said. "Old ones. They will not drive it away, but they may give us time." I asked her again, desperate now. "What is it?" Her hand lingered on the mirror. Her reflection warped across its broken surface. She did not look at me when she answered. "There are things that live between places. Between the world of the living and the world of the dead. They wait for openings, a window, a crack, a moment of weakness. Once they find a way through, they cling." I shivered. "Why us?" Her eyes met mine then, sharp and steady. "Because we noticed it." That day she worked in silence. She sprinkled salt across the thresholds and windowsills. She hung the knotted thread over the doors. She placed the cracked mirror on the mantel, facing outward. Every so often, she paused and tilted her head, as if listening for something only she could hear. By nightfall the cottage looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The air was heavier, the light dimmer, as though the house itself was holding its breath. We stayed in her room again. The lantern burned bright, the mirror propped against the wall, the salt laid in a fresh line across the floor. For a time the night was quiet. Too quiet. I lay awake, waiting, listening. Then came the sound. Not a knock. Not a whisper. Scrape. Like nails dragging across wood. It started faintly at the far end of the hall, then crept closer, slow and steady, until it reached her door. The lantern flame shuddered. The air grew colder. The scrape paused. Then the knob turned, rattling once, twice. My grandmother whispered words under her breath, words I didn't understand. Her hand steady even as the door shook in its frame. The knob stilled. For a moment I thought it had worked. Then came the laugh. Low and broken, like a voice unused to sound. It seeped through the wood, curling into the room, clawing into my chest. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The laugh wasn't only sound, it was inside me, coiling through my thoughts. My grandmother raised the lantern high and spoke louder now, sharp words that cut through the air. The laugh faltered. The scraping retreated, slow at first, then faster, until it vanished into silence. We sat in that silence for hours, neither of us moving, the lantern burning low. At last she said, "It knows the protections. It won't be long before it tries again." Her voice was firm, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The next morning, the salt line at the door was broken again. The thread above the frame was twisted, its knots undone. The cracked mirror on the mantel had shifted, though no one had touched it. The protections were not enough. That evening, as she reset the salt and rewove the knots in the thread, she said, "There is one more thing in the trunk. I hope never to use it. But if it comes again tonight, we may have no choice." She didn't tell me what it was. She didn't have to. I saw the way her hands lingered at the bottom of the chest, the way her eyes darkened when she touched whatever lay hidden there. The day passed in a blur of silence and waiting. Dusk fell, the shadows thickened, and the house seemed to shrink around us. That night we did not wait in her room. We sat together by the fire, the trunk open beside us, the lantern burning bright. The protections were set, every line of salt, every knot of thread, every mirror turned outward. We waited. The scrape returned at midnight. Louder this time. More insistent. It circled the house, dragging along the walls, the windows, the doors. The boards above our heads groaned, though no one should have been in the attic. Then the knocking began again. Not on one window. On every window at once. The sound echoed through the cottage, shaking the glass in their frames, hammering against the walls. The fire sputtered low, the lantern dimmed, the air thickened with cold. I turned to my grandmother, my voice shaking. "What's in the bottom of the trunk?" Her eyes did not leave the windows. Her hand reached slowly, steadily, into the chest. When she drew it out, I saw a book. Its cover was dark, worn leather, bound with a clasp of tarnished brass. No title. No markings. Only weight. She set it on the table, her fingers lingering on its cover as though reluctant to let go. "This," she said quietly, "is not protection." Another knock shook the windows. "This is invitation." The book sat between us on the table, heavier than it looked, the leather cover cracked with age. The brass clasp was tarnished, green with time, but it still held fast. My grandmother's fingers lingered on it, as though she feared it might leap open on its own. Outside, the knocking had not stopped. Every window, every wall, hammered by unseen hands. The lantern flickered, the fire sagged low, and the air pressed in thick and cold. I could hardly speak above the noise. "What is it?" Her eyes never left the book. "It was given to me when I was young, passed down from my own grandmother. A book of words that should not be spoken, and names that should not be known." The knocking grew louder, rattling the frames, shaking dust from the beams overhead. "Why keep it?" Yes. Her face was lined with shadow. "Because sometimes the only way to push a thing back is to call it by its name. But names are dangerous. They cut both ways." She undid the clasp with a sharp snap. The sound silenced the room for a heartbeat, as though the house itself held still. She opened the book. The pages were brittle, their edges browned, filled not with sentences but with symbols and inked drawings that twisted if you looked too long. The knocking stopped. For the first time in nights, silence filled the cottage. The fire burned steady, the lantern held strong. Even the cold seemed to ease. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "It's gone." Her head turned slowly toward me. "No, it's listening." She ran her hand over the page, tracing the strange shapes with her fingertip, whispering under her breath. Her voice was low and careful, like each sound had weight. Then, from the wall behind me came the reply. Not a knock, not a scrape. Voice. My own. "Let me in." I spun, heart slamming in my chest. But the hall was empty. The door was closed. The voice came again, identical to mine, but hollow, stretched. "Let me in." I clutched at my grandmother's arm. "It's using me." "Don't answer it." Her voice cut sharp. She didn't look away from the book. The voice grew louder, closer. My own tone, my own breath, but wrong. "I'm cold out here. Open the door." Every instinct screamed to move, to run, to block the door. But my grandmother stayed steady. She turned another page. The symbols shifted, curling like smoke. The voice changed. It was hers now. My grandmother's voice, cracked and old. "Child, let me in. It's safe now." I shook my head hard, covering my ears, though the words still slithered through. "Make it stop." She spoke louder, words from the page, sharp and unfamiliar, thick in her throat. The voice outside faltered, then screamed. Not her voice. Not mine. Something stretched too thin, breaking apart. The fire guttered low, then roared high. The lantern burst with light. And then silence again. The house groaned, the beams settling. No knock, no scrape, no voice. She shut the book with a snap and held it tight in her arms. Sweat gleamed on her brow, her hands trembling though her face remained firm. "It knows now that I have the book," she said. "That changes things." I stared at the leather cover, my stomach twisted. "What did you say to it?" "Not to it." Her eyes were far away. "About it. Enough to keep it at bay for a night. But not enough to drive it out." The thought of another night filled me with dread. "Then what will?" She placed the book back in the trunk, shutting the clasp tight. Her hands lingered on the lid before she locked it again. "Names have power," she said. "If we find its true name, we can bind it. Force it back where it belongs." Her words gave little comfort. The thing had spoken with my voice, her voice. It had walked our halls, pressed its hand to my door. It was no longer outside. It was here. That night we slept little. The book remained locked away, but its presence lingered like a shadow in the room. The house creaked, the windows rattled faintly, though no knock came. At dawn, my grandmother sent me to gather water from the well. The snow was deep, the air sharp, but I was glad to step outside. The cottage walls had begun to feel too close, too heavy. The forest loomed still and silent, branches bare against the pale sky. As I lowered the bucket into the well, I heard it again. My voice, soft, echoing up from the stone shaft. Let me in. The rope slipped from my hands, the bucket crashing into the water below. I staggered back, heart pounding, staring into the dark. The well was empty. No one there. Only the faint ripples of disturbed water. When I returned to the cottage, pale and shaken, my grandmother looked at me once and knew. It's spreading, she said. The house won't hold it much longer. She went to the trunk again that night, her hands slow, her face drawn. She lifted the book, heavier than before, and set it on the table between us. Her voice was quiet but certain. Tomorrow we search for its name. The book lay open on the table at dawn, its brittle pages spread like wings, the ink shifting when the light touched it. My grandmother had not slept. She sat in her chair with the book before her, whispering as her finger traced the lines. Her lips moved soundlessly when she reached the darkest marks, as if even she dared not let those words pass into air. When I entered, she did not look up. It hides itself well. But everything has a name. Somewhere in these pages it waits. I dared to ask, though my throat was dry. What happens if we say it? Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp and weary. If we say it wrong, it grows stronger. If we say it true, it bends. Her words gave me no comfort. We spent the day bent over the book. The symbols blurred together, curling and twisting when I stared too long. Some looked like letters, some like shapes, some like nothing I'd ever seen. My grandmother turned each page with care, pausing to mark certain signs with a strand of thread. The hours crawled by. Outside, the snow fell thicker, burying the path to the well, swallowing the garden whole. The world beyond the windows turned white and silent, as though even nature itself held back from the cottage. By evening, the air inside grew heavy again. I felt it before I heard it. The shift, the hush, the sense that something had come closer. Then the voice returned. Not from the door. Not from the window. From the fireplace. Cold, it whispered, curling through the flames. So cold. The fire sputtered. The logs hissed, as though drowned in unseen water. My grandmother didn't flinch. She pressed her palm against the page, muttering under her breath. The flames steadied, but the whisper grew louder, sharper. Hungry. The shadows on the walls deepened, stretching long and thin, bending in ways they shouldn't. One stretched across the floor, sliding toward me though nothing stood behind it. Backed away. It's here. Her hand snapped up. Do not name it until we are certain. The shadow stopped just short of my foot. Then it curled back, slithering into the corners, dissolving into the dark. Silence again. Her voice was steady, but her face was pale. It's trying to force us to guess. If we give it a name that is not its own, it will anchor itself deeper. I stared at the book, the pages that seemed to breathe with each shift of light. Then how do we find it? She turned another page, stopping at an illustration inked in black. A figure drawn tall and thin, with arms too long and a face scratched out by hand. Beneath it, symbols curled like smoke, looping back upon themselves. Every spirit leaves a mark, she said. The way it knocks, the way it whispers, the shapes it casts. All these are pieces of its name. We must gather them. That night, we did not hide from the sound. We invited it. The lantern burned low. The book sat open on the table, thread marking 3 different pages. I held the mirror in my hands, the crack splitting my reflection down the middle. My grandmother sat across from me, the book before her, waiting. Did not take long. The knock came, soft at first, then louder, pounding against every wall at once. The floorboards groaned, the ceiling bowed. The air turned sharp, biting my skin as though the very cold outside had been pulled in with it. Listen, she whispered. The knocking shifted into rhythm. Not random. Not desperate. Pattern. 3 knocks. Silence. 2 knocks. Silence. 3 again. She leaned forward, marking the rhythm with her finger along the book's page. That's part of it. Then came the scrape. Long, drawn-out nails across wood, circling the cottage, dragging along every wall. Another piece. The voice followed, broken and hollow. Not mine this time. Not hers. Child's. High and thin, echoing from the window panes. Let me play. Let me in. The sound made my chest ache. My hand tightened around the mirror, the crack biting into my palm. Don't answer, she said again, though her voice shook now. Just listen. The child's voice laughed, sharp and thin, before fading into the dark. She wrote another mark in the book. The symbols twisted, aligning in a way that made my skin crawl. The ink seemed to pulse, as though alive. At last, silence fell again. The fire crackled weakly. There eased. She closed the book with a heavy breath. We are closer. But not yet enough. That night I dreamed of doors. Endless doors, lined across a hall without end. Each one rattled, each one knocked. And behind each one, my own voice begged to be let in. I woke to find my grandmother already at the table, the book spread open before her, her eyes hollow with sleeplessness. It will return tonight, she said. And tomorrow, until it breaks through. But now it knows we're searching. It will try harder to confuse us. Her hand lingered on the book's page, the ink shifting faintly beneath her touch. We must find its name before it finds ours. The nights blurred together. I do not remember sleep, only moments of drifting before some sound tore me awake again. Always the knocks, always the whispers. Each time, it left behind another piece of itself, as though daring us to gather the fragments. By the seventh night, the book was thick with threads. My grandmother's handwriting filled the margins. Marks, symbols, scratches she claimed would bind the sounds into form. Her face grew paler with each page, her eyes sunken, her voice dry from chanting words I didn't know. That evening, as the snow pressed high against the windows, she told me, "We are near the end. It knows and it will try to stop us. Once the name is spoken, it cannot linger. But until then, it will claw at the edges." The fire popped. A shadow flickered across the wall, though nothing moved near the flames. I felt my stomach tighten. How will we know the name is right? Yes. Her eyes locked on mine. You'll feel it. Truth bites deep. The waiting was the worst. Each tick of the clock seemed louder, the silence between heavier. Midnight drew close. We sat with the book open, lanterns burning, the salt line renewed at every door and window. The mirror lay on the table, its crack like a jagged smile. Then it began. The first knock came not at the door, but beneath the floorboards. A hollow thud, as though fists pounded from the earth itself. Then the ceiling shook, dust raining from the beams. "It's pressing from all sides," my grandmother muttered, her hands steady though her lips were tight. "Stay with me." The knocking grew faster, angrier, until it was a drumbeat through the whole house. Then the whispers rose again. Many voices this time, tangled and layered. Some were high, some low, some so broken they were little more than breath. "Hungry," one hissed. "Cold," another moaned. "Let me in," a child's voice pleaded. And then, worst of all, one spoke in my own voice. "You can't stop me." Froze. My heart pounded. The sound of myself, twisted and cruel, pressed against my ears until I wanted to scream. "Don't listen," my grandmother commanded, louder now. She jabbed her finger at the book. "The rhythm, the knocks. Follow them." I tried to focus. The knocks shifted again. Bree. Bree. The same pattern as before, but now faster, more frantic. I traced it in the book, the symbols writhing until they formed a shape that seemed to cut the page itself. "Good," she whispered. "Keep going." The whispers turned to laughter. The lantern flickered out, plunging the room into dim firelight. The shadows on the walls stretched tall, their arms scraping across the ceiling. One leaned low, its face inches from mine, though it had no eyes, no mouth, only a blur of shifting dark. My chest locked. I couldn't breathe. Then my grandmother's voice rose strong, chanting words from the book. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the knocks. Say it, she urged. Say it with me. The marks twisted into letters I could almost understand, though they weren't of any language I knew. The sound of them tasted sharp, bitter. My tongue ached as I formed them, but when I spoke, the knocking faltered. The shadows hissed. We spoke again, louder, the syllables cutting the air like knives. The voices screamed now, hundreds of them, shaking the windows, rattling the doors. The fire guttered low, then surged high, blue at the edges. I shouted the final sound, the true one, the piece that tied all the fragments together. It tore from my throat like glass, burning as it left me. Cottage shook. The shadows convulsed, twisting, folding in on themselves. The whispers rose to a shriek so high it made my ears bleed. And then silence. The fire steadied. The lanterns flared back to life. The air lightened, the weight lifting from my chest. I looked at the book. The ink on the page had stilled, the marks no longer shifting. The name lay there, carved into the paper, sharp and final. It's done, my grandmother said, though her voice trembled with exhaustion. But as I looked around the room, I wasn't certain. The silence felt too deep, the air too still. What if it's only hiding? I whispered. Her eyes lingered on the mirror, the crack glinting faintly in the firelight. Then we'll know soon enough, she said. And though the knocking had ceased, though the whispers had gone, I could not shake the feeling that something still listened, waiting for the wrong breath, the wrong word, the wrong silence to slip through. The name had been spoken, but names have power both ways. The cottage was quiet after that night. Too quiet. For the first time in a week I slept. Not well, not deep, but enough to remember what rest felt like. My grandmother still rose before me, always at the table with the book open. Her eyes searching the same pages as though the words might shift again when she blinked. But they didn't. The name stayed fixed, carved into the parchment. Days passed. The air grew lighter. The fire burned steady. No whispers crawled through the glass. No shadows bent across the walls. It was as though the cottage itself had sighed with relief. I wanted to believe it was over. One evening, I found her staring at the cracked mirror on the mantel. Her hand hovered just above it, as though the glass radiated heat. "What are you looking for?" I asked. Her lips pressed thin. "Reflections lie. But they also reveal. This one's not done with us yet." I tried to laugh, but it caught in my throat. We said its name. It's gone. She finally looked at me, her face pale, her eyes shadowed. Gone doesn't mean dead. Not everything dies the way we think it should. Her words haunted me as night fell. That evening, I lay in bed listening to the wind. It rattled the shutters, shook the branches outside. Normal sounds, I told myself. Natural. But the more I listened, the less certain I became. Just before midnight I heard it. Knock. Not at the door. Not at the window. From inside. My breath hitched. The sound came again from the wall behind my bed. Hollow, deliberate rap. I sat up, heart racing, and pressed my palm to the wood. It was cold. Too cold. Then came another knock, this time from the ceiling. Then the floor. Then all around me, circling, enclosing. I stumbled to my grandmother's room. She was already awake, sitting upright, the book open in her lap. "You hear it too," I whispered. She nodded slowly. The last knock. The sound pounded through the cottage, louder and faster, the rhythm shaking the walls. The lanterns flickered. The fire hissed and dimmed. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice breaking. She closed the book gently. "We do nothing. We wait." The knocking grew violent. Plaster cracked, beams groaned, salt scattered from the doorframe as though swept away by unseen hands. The mirror trembled on the mantel, the crack widening with each shudder. "Why wait?" begged. "Because it's ending," she said. "This is its death rattle. Names cut both ways, remember. We didn't just bind it, we wounded it. Now it claws at the walls of this place because it has nowhere else to go." Her words fought against the sound. The pounding was so loud I felt it in my bones. My ears rang, my teeth ached, my chest shuddered with each slam. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than any I'd ever known. Heavy. Final. The fire flared high, then settled. The mirror on the mantel cracked straight through, splitting into two clean pieces. One slid from the frame, shattering on the floor. I looked at my grandmother. She exhaled long, her shoulders sagging, her eyes wet with exhaustion. "It's over," she whispered. For the first time I believed her. We buried the broken pieces of the mirror at dawn, deep beneath the frozen earth. She scattered salt over the ground and whispered words I couldn't catch. The book she wrapped in cloth and returned to the old trunk, locking it tight. And then life returned. Slowly. The snow melted in time, the garden grew again, the air filled with birdsong. The cottage became just a cottage. But some nights, when the wind is sharp and the fire burns low, I lie awake and remember. The whispers. The shadow in the hall. The way the name tore my throat when I spoke it. I have never said that name again. And I never will. Because names have power and doors once opened never truly close. So when I hear a knock at night, faint, distant, ordinary, I tell myself it's just the wind, just the branches, just the world turning. If this story gripped you, like, subscribe and share it for more. And I pray I am right.